summer to move to Calgary. He took a pay cut there, was wanting to start a family, and saw no chance of that happening here in British Columbia. So good for Calgary once again. Someone else leaving British Columbia to go to Calgary where things are more affordable, but it's a real challenge there as well. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will continue after question period. Thank you.
And he will have 5 minutes and 15 seconds left on the clock for his speech after 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Déclaration de députés, not oral questions, but statements by members. L'honorable député de Lac-Saint-Louis.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Nadia El Khoury, a gifted artist, dedicated arts activist, and dynamic entrepreneur who is a 2024 recipient of the Montreal Council of Women's Woman of the Year Award. Past recipients of this prestigious award include Sheila Goldblum, Chantal Hébert, and Margaret Trudeau, among others. In 2009, drawing on her passion for art and art education, and on a strong belief in art's transformative power, Nadia founded the Viva Vida Art Gallery in Pointe-Claire Village in my riding of Lac-Saint-Louis. The gallery features exhibitions on important themes, but also supports artist development and offers art education for youth and adults. Both the gallery and Nadia's own explorations as an artist have brought a new dimension to life in Montreal's West Island. Thank you, Nadia, and once again, congratulations on this well-deserved honor.
The honourable member from Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Speaker, I'd like to give a big congratulations to all the grade 8 and grade 12 students who are graduating this year in Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, and beyond. We are all proud of you for reaching this significant milestone in your educational journey. Your hard work, dedication, and resilience have paid off, and you should be proud of your achievements. This year's ceremonies are extra special for our grade 12 students who were denied a proper grade 8 graduation because of the pandemic. I hope that your high school graduation ceremonies are made even more memorable to mark overcoming such a challenging time. As you move on, whether to high school, post-secondary, to trade, or entering the workforce, remember to embrace every opportunity. Continue to strive for excellence and never stop learning. You are the future of Canada. Celebrate this momentous occasion with joy. Best wishes for your continued success and happiness, and congratulations again to the class of 2024.
The honourable member from Kitchener South, Hespeler.
Mr. Speaker, this week I had the opportunity to visit students from Waterloo, Wellington, and others from across Canada at the Canadian Museum of Nature, where they are participating in this year's Canada-wide Science Fair, hosted by Youth Science Canada. Every year for the past 11 years, talented youth from across the nation have had the opportunity to present their science and engineering projects that will transform the future of Canada's science and technology landscape. Some of our nation's brightest young minds come together to share their passions for STEM and innovation. The next generation of our country's scientists and innovators are bright with promise and curiosity, and I look forward to seeing what they will accomplish next. Congratulations to all the national winners that will be announced today.
Wonderful. L'honorable député de Berthier-Masquinongé.
The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, World Milk Day is coming up. Whether it's chocolate milk, skim milk, or lactose-free, we will always enjoy it. But because of market shares that have been given up in previous agreements, 1 out of 5 pints of milk will be imported from abroad, and that's why we need to get the Senate's approval for Bill C-282 as soon as possible. Our farmers don't want temporary compensation for permanent losses. They want to be able to live from the fruit of their labor and make quality milk for us. Our policies should serve the interests of people, of our citizens, and protect our own food security, not for foreign interests. We need to stand up. It's high time. Our producers are passionate about dairy production. They want a sustainable future. They're proud of everything they've achieved. They're asking the Senate to take quick action. Let's all celebrate World Milk Day on Saturday. The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Mr. Speaker, hear, hear. The fair maidens and noble knights of Vaudreuil-Dorion will all be coming together between June 6th and 9th for the 32nd edition of the Seigneurial, to eat, drink, play, and sing, and to celebrate Vaudreuil-Soulanges' rich historic heritage. Thanks to the Regional Museum of Vaudreuil-Soulanges, the town of Vaudreuil-Dorion, and Christiane Lévesque and her team, people will be able to visit the local charming crafts fair. They will love the period costumes and the incredible ambiance. So I would invite everyone in Vaudreuil-Soulanges to join me and enjoy these activities for the whole family, local crafts, and of course everything our seigneurie has to offer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, on Saturday, June 1st, we will celebrate World Milk Day. I would like to say thank you to our nearly 10,000 dairy farms and more than 500 processing plants in Canada. These are men and women who get up at dawn every day, put on their work boots, and do incredible work to feed Canadians with their quality products. In my riding, there are several of these businesses that every day provide us some of the healthiest and most nutritious products in the world. Not only that, our farmers also play an important role in meeting our environmental objectives. On behalf of all parliamentarians, I would like to say thank you for your hard work. As Conservatives, we will continue to support your sector, which is a key economic part of our country. So with World Milk Day coming up, I would like to invite all my colleagues to raise a glass of milk in honor of the Canadians who work so hard in our dairy industry. Thank you. I would remind the member once again that we cannot use props to make our point. And additionally, we only are allowed to drink water in the House of Commons.
The Honourable Member from Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I would like once again to launch my Community Champions Awards, for which we are now accepting nominations. Each year we recognize everyday leaders who work hard to build a better community for everyone. A community champion is an outstanding neighbor, such as a volunteer, frontline worker, parent, or unsung hero who demonstrates leadership. Through their leadership, they create a better society by fostering a culture of kindness and generosity. They inspire others to step up and be part of positive change. To nominate your community champion, please email my constituency office. Nominations are open until July 14th. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to honoring this year's outstanding community champions in Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Dartmouth, Cole Harbour.
Mr. Speaker, May 12th was International Myalgic Encephalomyelitis Awareness Day. I would like to acknowledge the approximately 2 to 3 million Canadians now living with this debilitating illness. ME, formerly known as chronic fatigue syndrome, is a devastating, chronic, complex, multi-system illness. It occurs in children, adolescents, and adults of all ages and backgrounds, and 3/4 of people living with the illness are women. Up to 75% are unable to work, and 1/4 are consistently bedbound or housebound. ME is an urgent health crisis, with research showing 50% or more of those with long COVID go on to develop ME. People with ME are suffering and desperately want their lives back. There is currently no cure or approved treatment for it at this time. It is therefore crucial that Canada take action, increase funding for ME research, and providing resources for national education and training. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Good job. L'honorable député de Bellechasse,
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Échemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, the housing crisis has reached an unbearable level for Canadians. In La Presse, we've learned that delays to get a construction permit in Montreal have now reached 610 days in some neighbourhoods. Nearly 2 years, Quebecers are suffering, and the leader of the Conservative Party sees that, and he's taking concrete action to help. His plan to build housing, not bureaucracy, is asking municipalities to build housing quickly. It will offer benefits to towns that do that and punishments for towns that instead create more red tape. Now, the Bloc Québécois voted against that solution yesterday, and it also voted against Quebecers' best interests when it voted for $500 billion in spending. The Bloc Québécois is refusing to make housing more affordable, even though Quebecers need it. We need common sense solutions to the housing crisis. Canadians need that, but the Liberal Bloc doesn't care. The Bloc is not helping Quebecers, and it is opposed to solutions to help them.
Member from Toronto Danforth.
Mr. Speaker, during the Second World War, our country held Japanese, German, and Italian Canadians responsible for the actions of their heritage or origin countries. And that was wrong. With the rise in anti-Semitism today, too many Canadians are repeating that mistake. It is wrong to hold Jewish Canadians responsible for the actions of Israel. The vast majority of Jewish Canadians feel a deep connection to Israel. That's called Zionism. And it is the same connection that many people in this House feel to their heritage countries or countries of origin. But we don't, and we shouldn't hold anyone to account for the actions of another country, and we should never question their loyalty to our great country. Let's all stand up against anti-Semitism. It's dangerous, and it needs to stop.
The honourable member from Flamborough-Granbrook.
Mr. Speaker, at every door, in every conversation, in every phone call, it's the same comment over and over again. Life is too unaffordable. How did it get this way in Canada? Well, we know that it's the inflationary spending, taxes, and deficits of this Liberal NDP government that have driven up the cost of literally everything, and that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. But Canadians are crying out for some relief. And that's why, in our motion before Parliament today, Common Sense Conservatives are calling on the government to suspend all gas and diesel taxes for the summer until Labor Day. That's $670 in savings for a typical Canadian family, enough to take a road trip or go camping or a day trip to one of the many outstanding local attractions across our country. The stuff that memories are made of. Some relief, some hope, until a new common sense Conservative government, under the leadership of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, enacts the tax on everything, everywhere, for good.
The honourable member from Calgary-Midnapore.
This week, the Calgary Herald confirmed how hard the people in my city are struggling as a result of the fiscal incompetence and arrogance of the Liberal NDP government. Since 2019, shelter and food costs have gone up 26% for Calgarians, while electricity and natural gas are up over 70%. Alberta used to be a province of opportunity and economic prosperity, but this Prime Minister has done everything he could to change that. His ideological carbon tax and his irresponsible spending have my constituents feeling desperation, dread, and lost hope. Young adults can't afford to have the children they dreamed of. Parents have to pull kids out of organized sport, and seniors are embarrassed that they have to rely on food banks. Today, we ask the Liberal NDP government to immediately axe the carbon tax, the federal fuel tax, and the GST on gasoline and diesel until Labor Day. I hope the other members in this House will do the right thing and vote to help Canadians who need and deserve a break.
It's common sense.
The honourable member from Brampton East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, dental care is health care, and I'm proud to be part of a team that is making dental care more accessible and affordable for millions of Canadians, including so many in my riding of Brampton East. More than 2 million Canadians have successfully signed up for the Canadian Dental Care Plan. Over 10,000 dentists and oral health providers have signed up to participate in this plan. And in 3 weeks, over 120,000 seniors have visited their oral health providers under our federally funded plan, saving seniors hundreds of dollars in dental care costs. Mr. Speaker, I find it hard to believe that the Conservatives across the way stand against these vital supports for seniors. The Canadian Dental Care Plan is a significant achievement by our federal government. Not only will it alleviate major financial barriers and burdens, but it will also improve the quality of life for many Canadians. As the initiative continues to roll out in phases, our plan will help improve dental health not only for the seniors in my constituency, but for seniors in communities across Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Big airlines are raking in billions of dollars of profits off the back of unpaid work. In Canada, flight attendants who are disproportionately women work an average of 35 hours for free every month. There is no reason big airlines who make huge profits should be making their staff work for free. Yet the Liberals have allowed big airlines to take advantage of workers. Today, flight attendants are in Ottawa fighting for their right to be paid for the work they do. They want this government to change the laws and correct this unacceptable status quo and ensure that when flight attendants are at work in uniform performing their duties, they're being paid. It's only fair. New Democrats agree. This government must stand up to corporate greed and protect workers. Flight attendants deserve better, and today I raise their voices here in the House of Commons by saying unpaid work won't fly.
Hear, hear. Oh. Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Beauport, Côte-Beaupré, Île-d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, Caillouche, our Acadian giant of country, died yesterday at 76 after suffering from cancer. His real name was Reginald Charles Gagnon. His life was very full and he had an exceptional career. Far from the limelight at times, he built a very loyal audience with his tall tales and sad love ballads. He was somewhere between Willie Nelson and Willie Lamotte, although some might say that they were more like Caillouche. Carrying his guitar, he played all over the place, in small towns and on big festival stages. He was inimitable, with songs like La chaîne de mon tracteur, Le frigidaire de mon chum, Mon bicycle, ma musique, and C'est ça mon Acadie. He was one of the most successful Acadian artists. He sold more than 100,000 albums. Our sincere condolences to his family, his loved ones, and his fans. We will join with our Acadian friends and hope that he is welcomed into heaven with a nice, cold Alpine beer. Thank you.
The honourable member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Here they come and there they go. The race to replace this Prime Minister is underway and Mark Carbon Tax Carney is out ahead of the pack. He's been seen jet-setting across the globe, sliding into ballrooms, sipping on champagne, eating caviar and trying to win favour with global liberal elites. And all the while, hardworking Canadians are struggling to afford to pay their rent and buy groceries. The Finance Committee has called for Mark Carney to come and answer questions. So will he have the guts to appear or will he keep campaigning from his private jet? Canadians need to know just how much carbon tax Carney will jack up this Prime Minister's carbon tax and if there's even $1 of inflationary spending that he'd do away with. But the reality is that he's never met a hard-working Canadian's tax dollar that he isn't prepared to take away from them and isn't prepared to do away with 1 cent of Liberal waste. Carney will do anything to make a buck. He's after Canadians. Will he come to committee and finally testify to answer questions?
The honourable member from Oakville North, Burlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On August the 9th, 2012, Canada's women's soccer team played France for Olympic bronze in London. In the dying seconds of the game, Oakville's own Diana Matheson scored the winning goal, a goal that changed the trajectory of soccer in Canada and inspired a whole generation of young Canadian female soccer players like Sophia Stevens from my office. Matheson and Team Canada would go on to win Olympic bronze in 2016 in Rio. She's more than just a Canadian Olympic hero, she's a trailblazer and an extraordinary leader. Canada is the only top 10 women's team in the world without its own professional women's league. In 2022, Matheson launched Project 8 to change that, with the goal of creating a league that would see Canada's best soccer players play in front of their hometown instead of moving abroad. This week, that dream became a reality when Project 8 announced the Northern Super League. Congratulations, Diana Matheson, on your hard work and dedication.
Questions. Questions orales. The honourable member from Regina Capel.
After 9 years
this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost, and Canadians are suffering through his inflation and high interest rates. For many families, the best hope for a summer vacation will be a modest road trip. Parents will sketch out a budget based on meals and hotels, and a big expense will be fuel. The GST, excise tax, and carbon tax have helped push fuel prices to near record levels, with many families unable to afford a vacation at all. Conservatives have proposed taking the tax off of gas and diesel for the summer, saving Canadians 35 cents a litre. Will the Prime Minister vote for our motion, or will he force more Canadians to stay home this summer?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, this is a prime cut of Conservative baloney. And I know what I'm talking about. My dad was a butcher, Mr. Speaker. The savings that the Conservative Party of Canada claims for Albertans is based on people traveling 37,000 kilometers during their holidays, Mr. Speaker. 37,000 kilometers. You can go from the North Pole to the South Pole, and you would have kilometers left to achieve the savings that they claim, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
That's just not true, Mr. Speaker. And everybody knows that the carbon tax costs more than the rebate. That is why the Prime Minister was humiliated into granting a carve-out for just some people in some parts of the country. And that's all we're asking for today, a carve-out on federal taxes on fuel and diesel for the summer. For the average family in Ontario, that would mean almost $600 in savings. Now, to the Prime Minister and his wealthy friends, that might not seem like a lot of money, but to struggling Canadians, that could make the difference to be able to say yes to the kids when they ask for some summertime fun. So will the Prime Minister have an ounce of compassion and help more Canadian families afford a vacation?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know math is not the forte of the Conservative Party of Canada. Let me walk them through it. By their math, the Albertans would have to use 3,293 litres of gasoline over a 3-month period, Mr. Speaker. At an average of 8.9 litres per 100 kilometres, that equivalent to 37,000 kilometres. You would have to drive for 10 consecutive days, non-stop, Mr. Speaker. If you had 2 weeks vacation, you would have 2 days left, or maybe 3, to enjoy your vacation.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
I don't think math is the forte of someone who brags that he doesn't think about monetary policy and thinks that budgets balance themselves, Mr. Speaker. Maybe the reason why the Prime Minister is being so cruel about this issue is because he's long forgotten the thrill of the family road trip. You see, he has wealthy lobbyists who invite him to their private islands where he doesn't have to pay for the villas and he gets to stick taxpayers with the bill. But Canadian workers have to pay for all the inflation, all the interest rates, and all the tax hikes themselves. So will he have an ounce of compassion, take fuel taxes off for the summer so Canadians can have a road trip this year?
I'm going to ask all honourable members, please, to not take the floor unless they're recognized by the Speaker, so that all members and so the public at home can listen and hear the question and also hear the answer. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think Canadians' idea of summertime fun is being locked in a car for 10 straight days. I think their idea of summertime fun also isn't having their dental care taken away or taking away their diabetes medication, or that their summertime fun is losing child care, Mr. Speaker. Their definition of summertime fun, I think maybe they should have a conversation with kids about what they want to do with their summer. I think they care more about getting dental care and having good teeth than being locked in a car for 10 straight days.
I would like to ask all members in this House to perhaps remain silent, including ministers and parliamentary secretaries. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. After 9 years, this Prime Minister, with the support of the Bloc Québécois, is simply not worth the cost of $500 billion of inflationary spending that has forced parents to skip meals to be able to feed their children. Whilst the leader of the Bloc Québécois and several of his MPs are campaigning to radically increase taxes on gas, Quebecers in various regions are paying the cost because they don't have access to transit. That's what one could call being completely out of touch. Will the Liberal Bloc put their ideological agenda on hold, at least for the summer, and vote for a motion to suspend the federal gas tax for the summer? The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The calculations and economies put forward by the Conservative Party is completely ridiculous. An Albertan family, for example, would have to drive 37,000 kilometers during their vacation. So you could leave from Montreal and go to Mexico City and come back to Montreal, go back to Mexico City, come back to Montreal, go back to Mexico City, and come back to Montreal, go back to Mexico City, and you'd still have kilometers to spare. Order. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, I don't know where they do their calculations, but they seem to be pulling numbers out of thin air, as usual. We know full well on our side that Quebecers that have to fill up their car every week will see a change in their bill at the end of the month. That is the truth. Quebecers who are paying too much for groceries, who are paying too much for their rent, and who can't make ends meet, who have to go to food banks, Mr. Speaker. They understand liberal mathematics because these mathematics take money from their pockets. Will they suspend the tax, the carbon tax for the summer? The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that mathematics aren't the forte of the Conservative Party of Canada, so I would like to help them. To try to benefit from the economies put forth by the Conservatives, a family would have to expend 3,296 litres of gas over 3 months. So at 8.9 litres per 100 kilometres, that means driving 37,000 kilometres. You go from the North Pole to the South Pole, and you could almost get all the way back to the North Pole. And you'd also have to do that in under a few months. It's complete rubbish, Mr. Speaker. Order. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. And then there was light, Mr. Speaker. The Outaouais Liberals have just revealed that there is a crisis in the healthcare system. They've written to Quebec City to ask for more money for healthcare. Where were these visionaries when Quebec City was warning of a $28 billion annual shortfall? Where were they when the Prime Minister, their boss, was fighting the provinces to not increase transfers by 1 single cent? Where were they when their boss imposed a cut rate agreement on Quebec? Why did these visionaries personally vote against our motion for a sustainable increase in health funding? The Liberals have been underfunding healthcare since 2015. Are they at least a touch embarrassed about this? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons. Mr. Speaker, this is proof once again that we need a Liberal member of Quebec to actually defend the will of Quebecers in this House of Commons. Of course, we respect Quebec's jurisdictions. It was not my intention to raise this, but thanks to the Bloc Québécois, I would like to reaffirm the fact that the Quebec government has to urgently work on healthcare in the Outaouais region. Any objective observer can see that we need to act in healthcare in the Outaouais. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. He's right. The Liberal MPs from the Outaouais are right. There isn't enough money for healthcare in the Outaouais, but it's their fault. There's not enough money in the North Shore. There's not enough money elsewhere in Quebec, and it's their fault too because they voted for it. They've never spoken out against federal health underfunding. They've never contradicted their boss who refused to increase transfers. They've never defended their citizens who were told to go to the private sector for treatment. They were too busy shopping for ministerial or speakership positions, and now they're waking up. Are these visionaries well placed to give us any lessons? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons. Mr. Speaker, when the Bloc Québécois vote against Medicare, when they vote against healthcare budgets, when the Bloc votes against everything that we are trying to do for dental care and dentistry, in the Outaouais region, if one takes the ratio put forward by the Bloc Québécois, and if we compare it to other regions in Quebec, we'll see that the Outaouais region is underfunded by Quebec with regards to the number of nurses, the number of surgeons, number of doctors, number of hospital beds. The Outaouais has a crying need for action in healthcare.
L'honorable député de Rosemont.
The honourable member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, the lack of housing, rising rent, the rising cost of living, that is the reason for which there are ever more homeless people on the streets of Montreal. We need social and affordable housing, but under the Liberals, homelessness across the country has only increased. Despite hearing promises, people do not have the right to housing. The Conservatives lost 800,000 affordable housing units when they were in power, and the Liberals have lost another 370,000. What good are Liberal MPs in Montreal when they can't even put a roof over the heads of Montrealers? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. There's one thing upon which I agree is that on this side of the House, and I include him, is that we truly believe that a government has to work to help homelessness and to fight homeless and chronic homelessness, which is not the case for the other side. Our housing project has given more money for housing to municipalities to put a roof over the heads of those who need it, and we'll keep working with municipalities. We won't just be insulting mayors like they do across the way.
The honourable member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
A landmark report this week exposed women with disabilities are more likely to visit the emergency room during pregnancy because reproductive care is not accessible. It's impacting their mental health during pregnancy and postpartum. People with disabilities have had enough of the Liberals' half measures. They're all talk, no action. Just like their Canada Disability Benefit that is nowhere near enough to live on. What is the government going to do to address these unacceptable barriers to care for pregnant women with disabilities?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. In every province and every territory, we've signed agreements to improve health care in this country, and that absolutely includes care for persons with disability. And specifically on sexual and reproductive health, we're making sure that we're there for women with the sexual and reproductive assistance that they need, making sure they have the contraception they need to have control over their sexual and reproductive lives and their futures. So absolutely, we're going to continue to work with provinces and territories to increase access and resist the cuts and the reductions that the Conservatives want to bring.
The honourable member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
After 9 years, this Liberal NDP Prime Minister is not worth the hunger or homelessness as 1 in 4 Canadians skip meals. Edith is a single mom in my community that can't afford to feed her kids because this Prime Minister doubled groceries and gas. And his bright idea, he jacked up the carbon tax 23%. Common sense Conservatives are calling on him to axe all federal fuel taxes this summer to save average families $670. Will he vote with us, or does he want more families like Edith's to go hungry and broke?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, maybe I need to go through the math again to make sure that it is understood. The savings that the Conservative Party is claiming based on that assertion is based on the use of gasoline over the summertime of 3,293 liters of gasoline. Do the math. It's not complicated. At an average consumption of 8.9 liters per 100 kilometers, a family in Alberta would have to drive 37 kilometers to be able to benefit for those claimed savings, Mr. Speaker. This has nothing to do with reality. It would be nice for the Conservative Party of Canada to come down to earth and leave La La Land for a little while.
The The honourable member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Well, Liberal math for that anti-Alberta minister says that jacking up the carbon tax 20% is somehow going to fix forest fires and reduce the...
I'm going to just ask the honourable member to start from the top again and just to rephrase it slightly on that front. The honourable member from Calgary Forest Lawn from the top.
Liberal math says jacking up the carbon tax 23% is going to somehow magically fix forest fires and reduce the cost of groceries like that Edith can't afford. And they think we're gullible and incompetent like the NDP, that we'd blindly support policies that made 2 million Canadians go into a food bank in a single month and that made 1 in 4 Canadians skip meals. Why don't they do everyone a favor? Give Canadians a break and put them out and finally end their misery. Call a carbon tax election so common sense Conservatives can scrap the carbon tax scam and Canadians can kick this costly carbon tax coalition to the curb.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
There they go again, Mr. Speaker. They want to ruin the rebate for Canadians. A rebate that disproportionately impacts the middle class and lower-income Canadians working hard to join the middle class. I also noticed, Mr. Speaker, that throughout the past few weeks, they've been quoting from reports from Food Banks Canada, from Salvation Army, and those reports are important. We thank those organizations for those reports. What they point out are challenges faced by Canadians. In those recommendations, which they ignore, they point to programs that this government has continued to support, the Canada Child Benefit, for example, that they've voted against every single time.
The honourable member from Lethbridge.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal government is not worth the hunger and homelessness that it's causing so many Canadians across this country. Many Canadians just simply look forward to a small summer vacation, a road trip perhaps. It's normally a time where they can go and camp in the mountains or go to a national park or visit loved ones. But this year, many Canadians can't afford this simple delight because this government has made life too expensive. On Monday, this House will have the opportunity to vote on a common sense motion to save Canadians 35 cents per litre on gas. Will the Prime Minister vote with us, the common sense Conservatives, so that Canadians can afford a simple vacation, or will he force them to stay home?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, good news, kids. You can take a summer fun time vacation where you're locked in a car for 10 consecutive days, nonstop with no bathroom breaks, and the Conservatives have a plan for you to have that summertime fun. And the cost? Give up the future of the planet, right? Don't worry, kids, about climate change. Don't worry about taking action on the planet. Enjoy your 10 hours in the car and let the planet burn.
You would think it's Wednesday. The honourable member from Lethbridge.
Well, this out-of-touch Prime Minister might be able to take a $230,000 taxpayer-funded vacation to some fancy island, but that's not an option for most Canadians. In fact, most Canadians just simply want to be able to get in a car and drive a few kilometres to enjoy a national park or the mountains for the day. But that's even out of reach for so many of them because of this Liberal government's out-of-touch policies that are driving up the cost of everything. On Monday, this House will have the opportunity to vote on a very common-sense motion that would take the federal tax off of fuel. It would make life affordable for Canadians and allow them to enjoy their summer. Will the Prime Minister vote with us so that Canadians can afford a simple road trip, or will he force them to stay at home while he enjoys his luxury vacation?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, today we're having a lot of fun with figures because the Conservative AI machine suddenly kind of broke down and didn't quite supply them with the right math, and they do rely heavily on that for mathematics. I do note that that member fights against a regime that sends 8 out of 10 Albertans more money than they pay in. But she was a little sheepish, a little quiet, when her own premier, Danielle Smith, hiked gas taxes 13 cents to fuel, increased government spending in Alberta. She didn't talk about that. I wonder why.
The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadians know this Liberal Prime Minister, he's not worth the homelessness, he's not worth the hunger, and he's not worth the tent cities that are propping up everywhere. But there is a plan to give some relief. A Conservative motion will take the carbon tax and all federal taxes off gas from now until Labor Day. It will save 35 cents a litre and maybe give Canadians a road trip. The only road trip these Liberals know are their ministers driving around in their limousines with their chauffeurs. Will they support the motion to axe the tax, yes or no?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
That Conservative motion, Mr. Speaker, is written on the same napkin as their housing plan. The reality is that whenever it comes to serious issues of the day, all they have are slogans, Mr. Speaker, hollow slogans. What happened in the House of Commons yesterday? Every single party in this House, minus the Conservatives, voted against their initiative because it would tax home building, Mr. Speaker, and it says nothing about homelessness. Finally, Mr. Speaker, most of their caucus is made up of rural members. Do they know that that housing plan only applies to a certain number of cities, not to the entire country, Mr. Speaker?
The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
It's unbelievable. This would save 35 cents a litre in gasoline. Now, it doesn't mean much to ministers who get driven around by chauffeurs in their limos who probably haven't pumped gas and know the cost of gas in about 10 years. But for the average Canadian family, it will mean everything. And they could actually do something about it. I know they don't take road trips, but actual Canadian families do, and it will make a difference. And they've got a choice. They can vote to actually take those taxes off, save Canadians 35 cents a litre so they can take a road trip, or they continue to punish Canadians with this damn carbon tax.
Just going to ask members to be very careful about the use of language in the House. The Honourable Minister for Families and Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives want to talk about numbers today, so let's talk about a few of those numbers. 4, the number of consecutive months that we've seen inflation decrease in this country. 750,000, the number of families benefiting from our affordable early learning and childcare. 1.3 million, the number of Canadians that have been lifted out of poverty with our policies. 400,000, the number of kids that will receive access to food at school. This is what our government is doing on this side of the House. Why won't the Conservatives get on side and support Canadians?
The Honourable Member for Lac Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the French Language Commissioner has been very clear. Quebec is incapable of franchising a large number of immigrants. Despite investing hundreds of millions of dollars, there are 642,000 people in Quebec today who still don't speak French. Only 70,000 of them have been able to take a francization course, which is a record, but which is still far from enough. When will the federal government finally going to share out the reception of asylum seekers and reduce temporary immigration in collaboration with the government of Quebec? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is exactly what we are doing. We are working hand in hand with Minister Fréchette and other provincial ministers. The member across the way seems to forget that La Loi 101 exists and has existed for a while. We, since 2015, have sent $5.2 billion to Quebec without asking for accountability for francization. If Quebec needs more Francophone immigrants, we're here to help them. The Honourable Member for Lac Saint-Jean. The Loi 101 that they do not respect themselves, Mr. Speaker. In any case, the French Language Commissioner has been clear. At the moment, 20,000 people a month enter Quebec and need francisation. Only 8,000 of them register with Francisation Québec. Francisation Québec can't maintain current levels. They can't work with these current levels of immigration, and so we can't maintain these levels without weakening the French language at Quebec. That's a purely mathematical finding of the French Language Commissioner. Will the federal government finally respect Quebec's capacity in receiving immigrants? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Mr. Speaker, once again, the member across the way seems to be asking the question under the wrong jurisdiction. Under the Canada-Quebec agreement, Quebec has most choosing powers when it comes to Francophone immigrants. They have the power and the capacity, and with $5.2 billion since 2015, they also have the financial capacity to do all of this without accountability. It's Quebecers who will have to ask answers of their government. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. That's not an easy answer, Mr. Speaker. The ability to fund everything is a key element in our ability to welcome newcomers, but it's hard to ask people to learn French when they can't feed themselves in the first place. In Drummondville alone, the food bank has recorded a 97% increase in needs this year, and so it's had to turn people away. This increase is also an increase through asylum seekers and foreign workers. Disappointed immigrants tell the organisation that, and I quote, they didn't think it would be like this in Canada, and they're right, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister finally take action and understand that exceeding reception capacity is tantamount to causing a humanitarian crisis, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. The member will once again blame immigrants for the increase in grocery prices. We must be reasonable, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, Canada will play a role, and that's why we are working hand in hand with Quebec to spread asylum seekers. There's work to be done on various jurisdictions. I'm looking forward to doing so with Madame Fréchette.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, and Canadians are fleeing Canada, moving south in record numbers, tens of thousands, the highest number in 10 years, escaping this Prime Minister's economic ruin, fleeing so they can afford to live, afford to buy a home, and stop paying for this government's bloat. This is an inconvenient truth from the Prime Minister's very own media machine, the CBC, this morning. Yep. So how many more Canadians have to leave their country before the Prime Minister realizes that his government is just not worth the cost?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, there it is, Mr. Speaker. I wondered when they continually put down our country who they want us to be and what they want to emulate. Now we know. They prefer to have a United States model, for example, of health care. Well, I can tell you I was down south a couple of months ago with my partner where an individual fell over. And when they came conscious after I called 911, their concern wasn't their health. Their concern was money. That they didn't have the money for the care. I don't want to live in that country. And on this side, we will fight for public health care. We will fight against the cuts the Conservatives want to bring to our health care system. And we will make sure that every Canadian gets access to the care they need.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
The plan is actually driving Canadians out of this country in droves. More than 126,000 Canadians left to go stateside in 2022. That's a 71% increase from the year before. Doctors, nurses, mechanics, young Canadians with university degrees, don't they get why they're leaving? His policies, the Prime Minister's policies, are hurting them. When will the Prime Minister realize that Canadians are just not that into him?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, families like mine chose to come to Canada from places that were difficult, where there were challenges. Canadians are proud of the country that we have. Conservatives keep talking this country down. There are people around the world, Mr. Speaker, that would choose to come to this country, that are choosing to come to this country every single day for freedom, for the capacity to be who they are, to love who they love, to be proud of their traditions, and to be able to do it in this country. We have health care. We have the things that Canadians and all those around the world are desperately seeking. We will keep fighting for that on this side of the House while they keep talking this country down.
The Honourable Member from Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, Canadians know just how unaffordable life has become, and the facts speak for themselves. They are so glaringly obvious, even the CBC of all places is covering the record surge of Canadians moving to the United States. 126,000 Canadians moved to the U.S. in 2022 alone, a 70% increase in the last decade. There are Facebook groups, some as big as 55,000 each, that are finding ways and sharing tips on how to move out of Canada. If things are so great, why are a record number of Canadians moving to the United States then?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, while we're talking about the United States, let's just take a moment to reflect what women in that country are going through. A lack of access to reproductive choice, Mr. Speaker. I read an article in the New York Times yesterday, Mr. Speaker, about the number of women that are dying because they can't access abortion care in their states, Mr. Speaker. That's the kind of future that these Conservatives want for Canadian women, and we'll fight for their freedom.
The Honourable Member from Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, every year hundreds of festivals light up communities across Canada. In Edmonton, the internationally renowned Fringe Festival supports thousands of artists, volunteers, and visitors, generating $16 million in economic benefits. Despite this, the Fringe and other festivals have had their federal funding significantly cut. This is devastating for our festivals and for our communities. These are already promised funding agreements. Why is the government cutting funding that is hurting Canadian arts and culture?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member, the Honourable Minister of Heritage.
I'd like to thank my colleague for the question because it allows me to say that we've reinvested $31 billion in festivals, including the Fringe Festival, which will normally benefit from this because we understand the importance that culture has for all communities across Canada, including during the pandemic. Festivals are absolutely extraordinary places to bring communities together and to share cultural events that bring them together and tell Canadian stories. Unfortunately, the Conservatives are going to vote against this in the budget 2024, like they do, like all other support for cultural events across the country.
The Honourable Member from Courtenay, Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, 523 people in Toronto died last year from toxic drugs, and still the Liberals rejected the City of Toronto's request to take a health-based approach to tackling this crisis without offering any other solutions. Then there's the Conservatives who keep yelling out harmful disinformation and attacking real people. People are dying, and Canada needs to take a compassionate approach. Treatment, housing, healthcare. Will the minister reconsider Toronto's proposal to tackle this crisis and save lives?
Here, here.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
That's why we refuse the Toronto public health request, because it didn't adequately protect public health and maintain public safety. We follow science, we listen to families, doctors, and people with living experience because we know what works. A full continuum of support from prevention and harm reduction to treatment. The only person the member for is listening is to... Sorry, that's it.
The Honourable Member from Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you. If you believe in something, defend it. Our government firmly believes in a woman's right to choose, which is why we are unwavering in our defence of abortion rights, in Parliament and in our communities. Conservative caucus members demonise abortion and would rather ban it from Canada. The Leader of the Opposition outright refuses to defend abortion. Why is he so silent? Canadians have a right to know where their leaders stand on abortion. Can the Minister of Justice please let us know the government's position?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, on this day in 1990, members of Parliament passed a Conservative bill that would sentence doctors to jail for providing abortions. Thankfully, that bill died in the Senate. Abortion is health care, Mr. Speaker. Canadian women should always have access to abortion. Recognizing this constitutional right to abortion, Liberal Bill C-75 removed abortion from our criminal code entirely in 2019. That's the exact same bill the Conservative leader keeps promising to repeal. While Conservatives speak at anti-abortion rallies, venerate American restrictions on abortion, this Liberal government will always stand up for women's rights.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, and where the Mayor of Montreal was elected, there are 540-day delays in obtaining housing permits. It costs more to build units. This is what you call incompetency.
This Liberal bloc government doesn't require anything from cities to step up housing development. Why is the Prime Minister refusing common sense and promoting the incompetency of the mayors that are supporting him? The Honourable Minister. In math class today, we look at basic competence. There's a whole idea of size. 1 is smaller than 10, and 6 is smaller than thousands. One plan is much bigger than 0 plans. And what do they want to do? Just cut infrastructure and just insult mayors, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't build any housing. The Honourable Member for Levis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this government, it's not worth it. The CMHC has stated that Canada needs 5.8 million units to restore housing affordability. This Liberal bloc government is building less housing than in the 1970s. It's a real scandal. Mr. Speaker, conservative legislation to build housing, not red tape, is a common sense solution. Why is this Prime Minister protecting the incompetence of Liberal mayors instead of building housing? The Honourable Minister. Once again, in terms of math, he has some lessons to learn. 0 is much smaller than 179 agreements across the countries with municipalities. 200,000 is smaller than 240,000, and 0 housing units is still 0. That's their plan. 0. It doesn't work. The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lille, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, Quebecers are paying the cost of this housing crisis. In Ville-Marie, under the mayor, it takes 540 days to obtain a building permit. Imagine this. 540 days in the midst of a housing crisis. This is what you call incompetency. Quebecers are suffering, and the Bloc is voting for $500 billion in appropriations and against common sense solutions in this crisis. Can this Liberal Bloc government step up to the plate and promote housing construction in Montreal and across Quebec once and for all? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we're talking about math today, so there's a very small figure that is so easy to forget because it's so small. It's 6 affordable housing units. 6 units that the Conservative leader, former minister, when he was minister across the country and throughout his entire term. Only 6 units. Where in the riding of my colleague who just spoke, there's 134 affordable housing units that have been built with the support of the Canadian government. And yet their leader continues to insult municipalities in Quebec. The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lille, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, it's more than 6 or 9 years under this Prime Minister, and more Quebecers are living on the streets because of the lack of affordable housing across Canada. This Liberal bloc government has doubled the cost of rent. Imagine in Montreal, it takes 2 years to get a building permit, and that's when things go well. The incompetence is blatant. Quebecers need solutions, but the Bloc voted against the Conservative leader's plan for affordable housing. Can this Bloc Liberal government, for once in its life, help people across Canada to help them build housing? Thank you. The Honourable Minister. Inaudible. They like talking about common sense, but when you build a house, Mr. Speaker, you make sure that basic things such as infrastructure, water, electricity, sidewalks, streets are all in place. And all they want to cut is infrastructure for municipalities to build homes. So once again, one plan, 3 million housing units versus zero units. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Don't forget the North, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Last March, Quebec's Minister of Justice informed us that 109 stays of proceedings for unreasonable delays were granted last year alone in Quebec. 109. How can you expect people to have confidence in the justice system when justice no longer takes its course? We've been sounding the alarm for years about this government's nonchalance in appointing judges. There's still a shortfall of nearly 60 judges, and it's a recurring problem. Does the minister find it acceptable that trials are aborted because he hasn't taken the time to appoint judges? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I won't accept the question asked by the colleague. I appointed justices as quickly as possible, the quickest in Canadian history. 113 appointments over the past 10 months. Nevertheless, there is always more to do. We are doing this. In terms of delays for criminal justice, we have established $700 million for legal assistance to help speed up trials.
Then I have
the Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc is obviously in favour of bringing accused persons to trial within a reasonable time frame. But when people accused of murder or other crimes against people escape justice because our courts are overflowing, that's when they lose our support. Putting violent, dangerous people back on the street because at the end of the day we don't have enough judges, this has serious consequences for public safety and in people's confidence in the justice system. Will the ministers support our bill so that people accused of violent crimes are not simply released because there's no time to judge them? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General. Just to be clear, that bill tabled today is to use the notwithstanding clause under the Canadian Constitution. They said that they would use the notwithstanding clause to trample the rights and freedoms guaranteed by the Charter. Now we see another federal party saying that the Charter is just an option. On this side of the House, for the Liberal Party, our government will always protect your rights and liberties guaranteed by the Charter.
The Honourable Member from Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
Earlier today in Health Committee, we heard powerful testimony from Indigenous leader Earl Thiessen, Executive Director of Oxford House, who said safe supply is akin to pharmaceutical colonialization. Will the Prime Minister listen to Indigenous leaders like Earl and put an immediate end to this dangerous government drug trafficking program?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, it is important to recognize that there is not one perspective on the best way forward through this toxic drug supply that is facing this country. That's why this government is focused on providing tools that meet the needs of communities. In fact, if communities are not comfortable with safe supply, then they are not using safe supply, Mr. Speaker. To allege that this approach writ large across the country would not have detrimental effects is false. And I will say this, Mr. Speaker, we on this side are focused on saving the lives of our friends' children, and we will continue to do that.
The Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester.
I think my honourable colleague has two questions, Speaker.
Honourable colleague is actually deferring to the Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, last night the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction said the Prime Minister's deadly experiment of hard drug legalization in BC was a success. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, drug overdose deaths are up 380% in BC. The Minister refused to rule out expanding the drug legalization in Toronto or Montreal or anywhere else in Canada. The message is clear. The NDP Liberal government will import death, disorder, crime, chaos caused by this deadly experiment. Why won't the Prime Minister abandon his deadly hard drug policies?
Hear, hear. L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives' remarks are dangerous. They're just saying that we need to clean these people up because they bother people. No, we're trying to help drug users. They don't choose to be addicts. They don't wake up one morning and say, yeah, we're going to start using drugs. We have a range of options so they can find a path to move forward and solve their health problem, which is not a criminal one, but a mental health one. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg-Saint-Charles. Yesterday, the Minister of Mental Health doubled down and said that the deadly experience with hard drug legalization in BC was a success. For the minister, success is a 388% increase in the number of deaths related to drugs. In 2023, the Mayor of Montreal reiterated her support for legalization of hard drugs, such as heroin and crack. And will the minister, can they reassure Quebecers that they will never reproduce the experience with hard drugs in Montreal?
Before we get to the Honourable Parliamentary,
Before we move to the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, I'd like to encourage all members, particularly the member for Courtney Alberni, that he had the privilege of asking a question, and so please not speak until you're recognized by the chair. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm also at the Health Committee, and in the last meetings we had, we did hear what the colleague has just said, but we also heard people say that it takes a range of options because there's not just one way of getting people to stop taking hard drugs. We need several strategies and initiatives to ensure that everyone finds a solution. And this is what we've committed to. In terms of the exemption, there hasn't been one yet from Montreal. So if we do receive one, we will do what is necessary. Thank you.
Honourable member from Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, tackling climate change, reducing emissions, and moving to a low-carbon future is a top priority for Canadians and for our Liberal government. We're implementing an aggressive climate action plan while trying to keep costs down for Canadians. We recently learned that the PBO has agreed to do a revised analysis on his report on the costs of carbon pricing to Canadians, as he acknowledged some errors in the original analysis. Can the Minister of Environment update this House on the benefits of the carbon rebate, Canada carbon rebate to Canadians, and comment on the PBO's recent publication?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague for her question. In fact, the Parliamentary Budget Officer on April 17 did put an update on his website saying that the last estimate that he had done was based on faulty premises. We thank the PBO for doing that. And in fact, it confirms what we've known all along, what economists are saying, what independent organizations in the country are saying. 8 out of 10 Canadians are better off with the federal pricing on carbon. It helps fight climate change. It helps Canadians with affordability. We thank the PBO for doing that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
NDP Liberal government is once again hiring foreign mercenaries to shoot deer on a BC island. The cost? It will cost taxpayers over $12 million to cull less than 900 invasive deer. This while local hunters had previously removed over 2,000 of the invasive fallow deer for free. Why is the minister wasting $12 million on a deer hunt Canadian hunters said they'd do for free?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no knowledge of this issue. We will look into it and get back to the member as quickly as possible. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Mr. Speaker, we have Canadian hunters that say they would even pay to hunt these deer, yet the NDP Liberals have found a way to make it cost millions. Wow. From Scott Carpenter. It's a real slap in the face to Canadian hunters, and there's millions of us in this country who would have been more than happy to spend our own money to go in there and harvest some of the meat ourselves. To invite foreigners into the country because they felt we were incapable of doing it ourselves is insulting, to say the least. What does this NDP Liberal government have against Canadian hunters?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, we will look into it and get back to the member as fast as possible. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Red Deer Lacombe.
Well, it just goes to show, Mr. Speaker, if it's not climate change, they don't know anything about it. In 2015, the Prime Minister told Canadians that you don't need an AR-15 to bring down a deer. Yet he's hired foreign mercenaries with semi-automatic rifles and large-capacity magazines to do just that. These NDP Liberals are spending $12 million to cull a few hundred deer on Sydney Island. The waste is typical. The hypocrisy is palpable. Why does this Prime Minister continue to demonize hunters while finding the most expensive way to do something that local hunters would have done for free?
There's a conversation which is happening between members who should take that conversation behind the curtains while the Honourable Member is speaking and the Honourable Minister is going to answer. So the Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I repeated my answer to the question twice, so now I'll reply in French. I'll get back to the member as quickly as possible. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Kitchener South Hespeler.
Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Task Force on Preventative Health just announced their updated breast cancer screening guidelines. I am disappointed that the guidelines do not reflect concerns put forward by many Canadians. Can the Minister of Health please share his views on the task force recommendations?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share the member's concern. I was concerned and disappointed, frankly, at the recommendations that were there. They do not seem to comport to the experts that I've spoken to across the country. That's why I've asked immediately for the Chief Public Health Officer to review this independent task force decision to make sure we convene the best science and the best experts to be able to inform the decision that makes sure that every woman in this country gets the guidance they need to protect their health.
The Honourable Member from South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are expecting this wildfire season to be devastating, and the Minister has said the same. Last summer, we had to rely on our military to help battle wildfires and support communities. This year, the Chief of Defence Staff says that's no longer an option. Wow. We need a solution. Mr. Speaker, Canadians overwhelmingly want a dedicated national wildfire fighting force. So will the Liberals create this needed force to tackle fires, support communities, and save lives?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, I'd like to thank the member opposite for bringing this forward. And first of all, I'd like to say to the 8 firefighters that were killed in last year's wildfire season, our hearts go out to their families. Over 200,000 Canadians were evacuated last year. The important thing is we work very closely with the municipalities, with provinces and territories who have the first line of defense when it comes to fighting wildfires, but we will always be there for them, and we are making sure that we have the proper resources in place to make sure that we are ready for this year. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, I had the great honor of participating yesterday in a symposium sponsored by Senator Mary Lou McPhedran from the other place and attended by so many brilliant young people arguing that the voting age should be 16 years old. Mr. Speaker, the Vote 16 movement includes a bunch of people over 70, like myself. Well, I'm not over 70. I'm almost 70. My point is, Mr. Speaker, all of us, regardless of party, should get behind this. Would the Honourable Minister for Democratic Reform, for responsibility for the elections, let us know whether the government's prepared to listen to young people and put the voting age at 16?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank
thank the member opposite for the question, and in particular for young people taking part in their democratic institutions. This is precisely what we want young people to do, to be engaged, and the democratic process involves Canadians all across this country at every age to take part in our democracy. PROC is studying this matter as well. We've introduced reforms to the Election Act. Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue to listen to Canadians to ensure that everybody can take part in the democratic process.
À la suite des discussions entre les
Following discussions among representatives of all parties in the House, I understand there's an agreement to observe a moment of silence in memory of Reginald Charles Gagnon, known as Caillouche. I now invite honourable members to rise.
Merci. C'est maintenant pour leur...
And now, on a point of order,
and the Honourable Député de Mégantic.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable is rising to ask the weekly question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, indeed. It's the traditional Thursday question. But in the past few days and weeks, we've seen that the government has a hard time sticking to a schedule with the repeated motions to allocate debate time and thereby limit debate. So I'd like to ask, will the government House Leader tell us what is scheduled for tomorrow and next week? And will the calendar that he presents today truly be the calendar for next week? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, despite my daily attempts to extend a hand to reach out to the opposition and make our work here more efficient, no, it's